just landed in Leadership and Enlightenment, a podcast where the guests are exceptional humans that have faced their fears to crest into their best selves, growing into a way they can help their communities, creating opportunities, and sharing their secrets and their tips that they learned along the way. Without further ado, here we are, my friends. Have a great time today and enjoy Leadership and Enlightenment. Joe, man, we had a great conversation at dinner the other night. I think it was over IMAX. We went to Aria Catch.
Yep. Yeah, it was phenomenal. I mean, the conversation was the best part of that dinner.
Good. The fact that we didn't know each
I
other.
barely even remember the food. I just remember everything we talked about, and glad we're able to continue that now.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, it definitely stood out to me that night. And I love the idea of how, like, in nature now in our business, like, we're put together with new people all the time that we can really grow and just expand from. And you had some great perspectives, dude. And, you know, I'm a bit older, shaking out a little bit, but just the idea that you've gone to college with some mainstream individuals that we've seen on TV, you know, you understand like how the climate politically in the world is working. But just aside from that, you're an entrepreneur on top of a businessman that works for a corporation. And that to me stood out more than anything. I'd love for you, dude, if you could just take the audience back to, you know, dude, start at your childhood or wherever you want and kind of build us up to how did we meet Joe and how are we sitting here now?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I think just like anybody, we all have a few transformations we go through as we grow up. But I think the entrepreneurial mindset came to me it was 7th grade and maybe 8th grade. And we're going to high school and we had electives for the first time. An intro to business is one that stuck out to me. And I remember I was sitting in our music room in our junior high and looking at like all the classes you could pick from, and intro to business was on there, and that just caught my eye. I'm like, all right, I want to start a company one day. I have no idea. I mean, as an 8th grade, I have no idea what I'm doing with life, let alone how to start a company. But that was my first spark into entrepreneurship. And then
what year was that? What year was that in? Because I had the same thing happen to me in 5th grade, and I'm starting to wonder if there was something out there that they were doing, but it definitely hit the same spark. I ended up being a police officer in the town unit.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
But we had a currency where they were called Eagle dollars, and we were able to trade and use commerce. And it really excited me in this idea that we could create and sell. I love that too. It hook, line, and sinkered me from that point on. Where did you end up taking it?
Yeah. So I took it at Downers Grove South High School in Downers Grove, Illinois, which is this is kind of funny. Every Friday in class, we would watch an episode of The Apprentice. And that was honestly, I think it was just the teacher's way of just relaxing a little bit on a Friday, but we would dissect everything. I think it was the first season when they talked about location, and they had to do, I don't know if it was a lemonade stand or a hot dog stand or something, but we dissected that. Like, all right, why does location matter? Why are certain locations better than others? It's interesting now looking at, like, you know, with Donald Trump as the president, you would have never thought in our little business class in high school that this guy is the president. And I guess whatever you think of him, like, that show ended up giving a lot of content to like 14 and 15-year-olds at the time to make it relatable and to, you know, kind of wrap our heads around what business actually is. Because it's an arbitrary concept if you look at it. Like, you have brick and mortar businesses, you have money exchanging, but business, especially in the events industry, a lot of it is not tangible. Like, you could visualize our trade shows, our breakouts and meetings, but our conversations that we have on the phone or booking business or planning events, you know, a lot of that's not tangible.
Yeah. Unless you start a baseline. This is like kind of where my adventure's gone. And we started talking at dinner that night. Is like when you get out and you start your business model, and we're going to let the audience know what yours is in a minute. You start from this place. It seems like an illusion. And you start to layer on these efforts every day that you're building in it. I mentioned it earlier. I call it mental momentum. And you keep putting this effort in every day that you find in yourself. And I know to you, Joe, it seems like this is the way we're all built, but you and I both have to recognize, like, these are special talents that aren't necessarily specially developed. They're part of your character and your human nature. And you know, I draw back all the time in this podcast because it's called Leadership Enlightenment. Like, when did you hear that bell? That ding, Because that to me, there's something behind that that drives you, moves you into your life, and it just kind of settles back in there with you. Like, this is something that has to happen at one point or another in my life,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna make it happen. But you ended up going through college and ended up in what career industry are you in now? Enlighten everyone.
Yeah, so right now I work for the San Diego Tourism Authority. So in the CVB world, when I was in college, I had no idea what a CVB was. Didn't even realize what our industry did. So I started my career right out of college with Hyatt Hotels at the Hyatt Regency in Chicago, and got the job through a connection and had no idea what I was signing up for. I knew it was sales. I didn't know what I was selling. Didn't realize I was signing up to be at the biggest hotel in Chicago. And at the time, Hyatt's biggest hotel in the company. But I want to go back actually before college with that spark. And I think my spark for entrepreneurship actually started in a nonprofit setting. So
Yeah.
my junior year of high school, we did a Relay for Life fundraiser, and I was on the committee for it. I didn't have a leadership position at all, but the day of the event, I think it was April in the suburbs of Chicago, it was freezing cold. Like there's frost on the ground. It's a 24-hour overnight event, raising money. I just remember like the leaders that we had just kind of cooped up in the heated, I don't know if it was a locker room or what it was, but just kind of checked out. And we had events going all night long. The entire point was to stay up all night. And so me and one of my friends, who ironically also works at the Hyatt in Chicago now, we kind of just took over the operations of this event. And I looked at that spark, and tying this into entrepreneurship is like, we had to figure out different ways to make money, to raise money at this event. So we had like a fake beer pong tournament with water. We had a Mr. Relay where I actually dressed up in a dress and we did a sprint across our track in high school. So it was like on the spot, and even in the planning stage, figuring out how to raise money for this. And this was in 2009, I think, peak of the recession. People were struggling on their own, and trying to raise money was very difficult. And I learned
Hmm.
that right away with all the businesses I'd go to. Trying to get them to donate a $50 gift card was like pulling teeth. And I was
Yeah.
much cuter than I am now as a 16 or 17-year-old trying to beg for money. But that gave me a spark of like, I was able to be very successful in that one event. And it's the same mindset, whether you're raising money, whether you're selling a product, you're selling meetings, you're selling wine.
Yeah.
There is an entrepreneurial aspect in raising money or generating revenue.
Yeah. No, you're so right. I heard an interview yesterday, and it was one of these actors that we would all know. And he was talking about how like you either have it or you don't. And it really resonated with me in the idea of the events industry and like, how do you determine if you have it or you don't? And it's this interesting drive that's within you that gets scratched. I see it over the years as, and everybody's heard me say it 100 times, as being on the spectrum, being neurodivergent, that it fits my personality type. And I know I brought it up to dinner that night, and everybody at the table goes, whoa, what does he mean? But I mean, I see OCD as your drive in a day, the way that you actually kind of create your rhythm in your day and how you move yourself through that. And, you know, that obsessive or that associated idea of being dyslexic is seeing this holistic picture bigger than you can. And I think it has a lot to do with entrepreneurship and that web that kind of fits within our language of life. And if we were a scientist or we were an attorney or anything else in any other career, we would find these satisfactions within those dynamics. But for some reason, in the events industry, it fits us in a certain place. And I have to say, like, you either got it or you don't if you're working in this industry. It's very hard to motivate yourself and the ongoing traction points that we need when we're so busy. You and I started this conversation with, oh my God, there's not a minute left in the day. And how do we fit into this still? But you found, even out of college and creating a base career for yourself and growing, that you had time that you were going to still invest in. And tell us about what that means in this idea that we've been building up to in your wine business.
Yeah, so I started a wine events company in 2022. So I was coming out of COVID. I was still working with Hyatt Hotels, but in San Diego. And California being probably the strictest state, not probably, the strictest state during COVID, we had to close the hotel. We were all furloughed. And it took a while to bring business back. And I would wake up every morning. I'm like, all right, I'm furloughed. Do I wait this out? Do I do something else? Like, what do I do? And I'm like, and I didn't want to leave the industry. And at the time, I don't know if you've seen those Psalm documentaries that were on Netflix. Probably like 10 years ago now, they came out. They came back on Netflix during COVID. And I was watching those, and it's a group of guys who are going through the Master Sommelier exam, which is extremely intense, tons of studying, and definitely worthy of making a documentary on. And I'm watching this a second time, probably 6 years after I watched the first. I'm like, oh, you know what? I've always liked wine, but I can never wrap my head around it. Maybe I'll start taking classes. So then Instagram comes in with a very appropriately targeted ad that San Diego State had a wine business certificate. So I took a class there, kind of, got the basics of wine. And I'm like, all right, I'm into this. I'm going to take some more classes. I think I was still furloughed. It was partially at the time. I'm like, all right, if something like this happens again in the events industry, I need a backup. So I was like, all right, I like wine. I'll just, and I was going to all these wine tastings. So I was talking to some of the distributors. I was like, hey, do you have anything like part-time, commission-based, a level 2 sommelier at this point? Just want to get in and get my feet wet. So I started working for a distributor in San Diego, part-time, and coming out of the pandemic, just selling wine to bars and restaurants wasn't fun. I got a boutique portfolio, amazing wines, but they're like, Joe, we just need margin. Like we
Mm.
need to recover, and we just need margins. That's the name of the game. And I'm like, well, I don't have that for you.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was like, all right, I'll just start my own events company. That's what I do in my day job. So I started just doing wine tastings for people in San Diego. And I would go to Bevmo, which is their like large scale, like the California large scale liquor store. And I'd pick a theme of wine and just do it for different groups. And then that expanded into selling wine, teaching wine, doing different team building activities with wine. Because wine, there's a misconception that you make a lot of money in it. You definitely do not. So I do like a
I've heard
shotgun
this.
approach and do a few different things within wine for the money to make sense and the amount of time I was putting in.
If I could peel you back for a minute, though, and the idea of an entrepreneurial mindset, you've set so many stages naturally that I need to highlight. First off, you did your work before you came into the business. And this I've seen in many examples of successful humans that are out there running in their entrepreneurial worlds. Like they don't just guess at something. They do the research, they see their margins, they realize there's a need. Then they develop this understanding if they have a love for it, and they can, move their passion into this because they know that's what's propelling them. But to get into something and not 100% know what you were doing, that's the other second, I think, pillar that all entrepreneurs use that when they're successful is, yeah, they do their work, they know what they're getting into, but they don't have 100% knowledge of how they're going to do it. They just jump in and they start working with whatever the medium is that they have to work with until it grows. Now, that's where the subject of the conversation for me starts to get real interesting. What is growing you? Like what inside at that moment for you is driving you? I mean, is there anything, Joe, you can, touch on that you thought like, this is something that I do that keeps me moving?
Yeah. Well, I think with that is I have all these ideas of different things. There's so many different businesses I want to start. But I think going to your point of doing the background knowledge and just getting in, I think as an entrepreneur, you everything I read in entrepreneur books or even podcasts is just do it. If you wait till you have all your ducks in a row, you're never going to be able to do it. You're going to wait until everything's perfect, and by the time that happens, it's never going to happen. So I kind of did that with wine. Like I was taking wine classes, but I was not an expert at all at that point. But I looked at it like I met so many people who sell wine that had zero certifications, didn't really know what they were doing, but they were great salespeople. And I was like, I'm going to get the certifications to have that background knowledge and the credibility, because that's all I had at that. Like I'm going to, I'm trying to sell $100, $200 bottles of wine to people. And if I just say I've been in the wine industry for 6 months, that doesn't
Right.
really give me the credibility I need without different certifications and all of that. But the spark, I think, I get the spark every day with different ideas, whether it's wine, whether it's the events industry. I live in Chicago and I look at open storefronts every single day. I'm like, all right, if I own that property, what would I put there?
Yeah.
So I've got that spark every day. So I don't know if it's what I do to drive that spark, but what gets that spark to ignite something.
Yeah.
And for me, wine was that. It checked a lot of my my interest boxes. You've got, I like drinking and going out with friends. Wine's very social. It's very geographical. You have to
Mm.
learn about different wine regions. And every single wine region is beautiful. A great
Which
place to travel,
you've gotten
cultures.
to travel around that, right?
I have, yeah. I was just in Italy about a month ago, looking at a meeting with some of my producers is driving around the regions that I've studied hours and hours over, but have never been and never got to enjoy anything about the region except the wine.
And how did you feel when you were there?
But it felt perfect. Well, and then I think going back to Instagram ads, now I get ads for different property in Italy. And I'm looking, I'm like, all right, you could get a villa in Tuscany for the price of a 1-bedroom condo in
Yeah.
Chicago. Whoa, all right, is that my next move?
Yeah. Well, now you're
But yeah,
cresting
the
into the world.
travel. Go ahead.
I was gonna say you're cresting into the world I love to talk about is experiential learning and travel and how it really, just I don't know, it fulfills you in a way and kind of again it goes back and checks some of these boxes you didn't even know you had. When I was on the hotel side for many years in Vegas, I would only understand travel by what I saw through media and whatever I was pipelining through. And when you get out into the world and you start moving around in these different regions, like you said, you have to immediately go to your like primal instincts of communication, body language, eye contact, personality tone. It really kind of represents you as a human when you're in those situations. And you have to, find some balance in yourself. And, that excitement drives you through. And I always joke, like, I thought I needed a big pile of money to go out and see the world. It just turns out you need the right job or the right passion. And it all seems to come together. And I think it's a really neat thing to draw out when the audience hears an interview like this and realize, like, Joe, how old are you actually?
I'm 32.
Okay, so 32, and you're talking about experiences that most 52-year-olds wouldn't even say they've had yet. And it's about this understanding that you don't have to be perfect at what you do, but you actually can have this ideal lifestyle about being flexible and fluid and how you see yourself and in your industry. Because I think a lot of people would get tunnel visioned into the idea that I was a hotelier and I work for CBB and I love wines, but the idea, I think, is really how do you holistically bring all these things together into the same person, and you're allowing yourself to be that person every day so that you're not have to separate your time. You're actually holistically focused in the same common goal, and all of them support each other. And I think your example of how to cross those two bridges together, I think is absolutely priceless. That to me is, I mean, I know you're kind of nonchalant about it, but this is a big thing that you have these two things going on at the same time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think like I look at anyone my age and especially anyone younger than me, is income hasn't kept up with the cost of living. So I look at like anyone my parents' age, I have to make 4.4 times what they did at my age to live the same life that they did,
Yes.
which is
Yeah,
nuts.
dude, well, it's true though, because when my wife and I were raising kids, I would say to her, hey, we need two full incomes. Where my parents raised me, they only needed one income. And I said, by the time our kids are in college, we'll need 2.5 incomes, which we were focused on the same way. And I got to tell you, I think my kids, they need 3 incomes in this ideal of having to invest into the world around us because of, costs and things like that. What are you seeing in your world?
Yeah. I mean, like, and working with San Diego, like I'm paid beyond adequately. It's a great job. I think anyone my age, whatever industry you're in, you need a second source of income. If, and to your point, even a half or another third, just to live a comfortable lifestyle. It's getting tough. So I think, anyone who's got that entrepreneurial spark, start a side business. You don't, a lot of them, like what I did, like I piggybacked off of an importer in San Diego to get started. So I didn't really
Yeah.
have much of an upfront cost. They paid me a commission to use their existing infrastructure. And that's how
Yeah.
I got started. So I think a lot of people, whatever your passion is, figure out how to piggyback off of someone else first. And if you end up branching out of that, you're not necessarily going to be a competitor of theirs. You're going to learn something new about that industry or that niche that you don't just need to copy and paste what other people are doing.
Yeah.
What I do with wine, I think, is a little unique. Like the importer that I use is tiny. They've got a very unique business model, but I'm doing events. I'm helping restaurants who don't have a beverage director build their wine lists. I was teaching one. I've done so many different things that, if I followed the cookie cutter, oh, I'll just open a brick and mortar wine shop, that's not different than any other wine shop. You can be
Yeah.
more personable, you can source better wines, but at the same time, it's not really any different. So I think anyone watching this, find if you have that entrepreneurial spark, figure out what your passion is and figure out how to start with $0 down.
Too, I love that. And I mean, I know to some people it's gonna seem somewhat stereotypical, but like, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this a lot. This is like his whole platform and to
He started with
understand how.
wine. He was doing
Yeah,
little
it was
wine videos
it's
when
very
nobody
cool
else
to see
was.
that. Well, and he didn't start with an intention on doing anything with it, from what I understand in the way that he tells his story. He did it because it was a passion project. He was trying to make sense out of something and scale from a place, like you said, from $0. And he was able to use his interest and create that catalog of wines just out of a pure desire to create. And then that elemented into something else that folded into something else. And before you know it, there's like this force around you that's working within you because you're actually creating in a situation that you're in your truest light. And, I go back to the idea that the podcast itself is like, there's these places that I've seen humans in where they inspired others. And then a lot of times we see it in music or in arts. But I say that there's also this inspiration in the idea of being human and who we are. And like when you're singing your best song like you are, to me, it just shines this light through, man, that other people see in their own and they wonder, like, could I do that? I could actually do that. Joe has shown me that there was nothing that stopped him from investing himself and finding this place of passion. And look at you now, brother. I mean, at your age, the world is your oyster, and the idea that you've learned these techniques in business and wine, but it floats across. The product itself is kind of irrelevant when you really look at finding your best holistic self in it. And I'm reminded of the book of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, is also
Yep.
in the same kind of an idea of investing yourself into something of your passion without creating a monetary need for it. And when you're able to put yourself out in life like that and, shine the bigger light, the monetary side starts to follow it because it wants to energize what you're doing instead of you looking for things to make money.
Exactly. I mean, speaking of Think and Grow Rich, just I think for the fourth time, I'm rereading his Outwitting the Devil. If you haven't read that one, put that on your list. I
I
just
will.
started it again last night
Wow.
because I think, and that's
Reading
like,
to
go ahead.
is reading a big deal to you? Do you
It
love to
is.
read?
I
Yeah.
read almost every day. I try to read 25 books a year, which with audiobooks, I do hit that. But my goal is 25 hard copy books a year. I
Wow.
think I'll end this year at 10, but audiobooks, I'm at like 30. But yeah,
Look at
reading's
you.
huge for me. And I'm kind of a psychopath with how I decide to read. I read 3 different books at a time, one fiction, one business related, and one history related.
And what brought you to that? Why do you read 3 at a time?
I can't stay interested in one start to finish
Okay,
without my
I get
mind
that.
deviating to
Yeah.
different topics. So a
No, I
little bit
get
of
that.
ADHD, but I'll lose interest before I finish a book, no matter how good it is, if I'm just reading one.
But that's the cool part is you found a strategy around that to gain power from understanding how you fit, which goes back to this idea of the events industry and that we're all on the spectrum, that once we realize that you gain power from that, not weakness, where some people might set a book down and say to themselves, I can't do this because I can only stay halfway in. And I found audiobooks myself. They're truly my passion. And I'll listen to an audiobook 3 times normally. And the first time is just kind of a glaze over.
Yep,
Second
I'm the
time,
same
some things
way.
will hit me. Third times, I'm digging into those points I'm looking forward to them talking about again, that I want to re-interest myself. And I'm doing it as I'm walking through an airport, on a plane, in a car, wherever it is. And I think the idea is that, to be a learning representative of this world is what stands apart in a lot of the ideals of how to motivate yourself and how to start somewhere, is to find that, that passion, is to start to read. We can find a lot of information around us, but when you really dig into books, you realize like somebody wrote that book. They had an intent to give you some information, and it took them a long time to develop that thought, whatever that was. So you kind of almost get to see as a fast forward in life, like you get to live through their ideal and get to the end of it without having to
Yep.
experience it step by step in yourself. And I get to emulate a lot of those things. And that's kind of where we were talking a little bit ago, was like, how do you get started? Is you find something to emulate that you can agree with, and then you build from that place. At least that's my strategy.
Yeah. And I think the hardest part of that is starting. The first
Yeah.
step, getting yourself to take that first step is the hardest part.
What did you do to take your first step?
I don't know. I think I'm trying to think what my first event was. When I started doing wine just as events, I think it was so I was a member of the University Club in San Diego, which is like it's like a city club. So I guess think country club, but not as expensive. In an office building. They had a bar, they had private event space, they had co-working space. And I think I just did an event for people there. I think it was when actually I think we did in like their boardroom. Just had like 8 to 10 people. I picked the wines and just did a typical wine tasting, and that's how it started. But it was easy once you do it. I think the
Once
hardest
you're in your
part is
alignment, yeah,
yeah, and it's I think we were both saying this earlier is you can't wait until you have all your ducks in a row. You can't just keep reading things and interviewing people or whatever, however you're absorbing knowledge to start. You just have to start and figure it out as you go.
yeah. I have this great friend of mine. He's always been an entrepreneur since high school. Never worked for anybody, and I always find that fascinating. Been involved in a lot of different companies and ideals, and we had this opportunity together that I didn't take, and he took it, and he was financially rewarded for it like 7 days later. And I looked
I
at
think
him and
we
I
actually
said,
talked about this at dinner a little
did
bit.
I? Yeah. So I said, Pete, like, why did you make that decision and I didn't? And he says, because I listened to the bells. Everybody hears the bells. And they convince them 100 ways over not to follow that signal. He goes, I just follow that signal without regard. And I might miss 1 out of 10, but I hit 9 out of 10. And I'm like, wow, that is a trust of faith and knowing that you're leaving this lane open for something like that to happen. And I think that there's a big like border there for people to kind of cross when they go from their conditioning mindset to this idea of an entrepreneurial mindset and realizing like when you take that steps, there will be no rationale for it. Like
Yeah,
you, it's an instinct. It's something that you feel impassioned by inside, and you're willing to do it without the regard of others around you to tell you yes or no. And it's this drive. And I think we all have something like that within us. We just get comfortable finding, that hiding behind that idea of the way our brain relates to fear and will position us not to take a chance because we don't want to be afraid of failing. But the ideal is fail. Dive into that first event like you did with the wine. Come out of it with 6 things you would have done differently. It's not a failure. It's the next step and how you build on that. And then, really, taking in this gratefulness that you have this opportunity to invest yourself in your own passion project, which, dude, idealistically, we don't have the time on this podcast to talk about it, but that is the key to happiness is having this
100%.
purpose that you really believe you're helping your community with and that you're investing into your community with this purpose. And wine falls right into that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think like you touched on risk, and I think that's one of the most important factors to consider is yeah, there's risks in anything we do. There's risks in staying in your W-2 job. There's risks in leaving it. But for those people who don't have an entrepreneurial mindset but don't want to take the risk, I mean, there's a term called entrepreneurship. Is you stay with your full-time job and find different ideas within them. And I think my boss was San Diego. Anyone I've worked for at Hyatt probably were driven nuts by the amount of ideas I would spitball at them to like, oh, if we did this, if we started this, nothing related to my day-to-day job of selling meetings. But all right, if we rent this space in the hotel out that we're not using, uh, you know, I in my brain always every single day, multiple times a day, I'm thinking about things like that. And I think as long as you have open-minded leaders in your organizations or leaders who are also entrepreneurial, throw those ideas out there. If it's not something you're willing to take a risk on and start your own business, bring it to your existing organization and see what you guys can do better
Yeah.
in new
Practice with it
ideas.
at work. Practice at work. A lot of public speakers, coaches in the world, they were sales leaders that were used to being on stage in front of audiences that practice that conversation and they just took it into their own world. So, I can't agree more. When I rose through my ranks in the hotel side, and gotten closer to my executive roles, I realized like public speaking is a big deal. All leaders need to be able to express themselves in front of their community, in front of them and their teams. And, Toastmasters was a big thing for me to go through for about 3 years to identify into this idea of growth and learning. But I didn't wait until I was out of my corporate job to do that. I, like you, took it into my corporate role and I invested in my teams, invited them into it, and then really brought myself into coaching opportunities within the hotel brand that I was in. and, working on your craft, whatever you think that thing might be later on. And I wish I had just taken another minute to realize I was doing all that. And I think this is the cool part of our conversation, Joe. Is like, I don't think most 32-year-olds would expect their peers to have conversations like this that have actually taken steps. It's usually this idea of what I want to do, not something I have done. And here you are expressing that, brother. I'm real proud to know you as a friend, man. I can't wait to continue these conversations. I know you're going to have trips and things down the road that we're going to have conversations about, but this one, I think, is going to hit an audience that they're going to want to hear more about your life as it grows too.
Awesome. Well, yeah, dude, thank you for the opportunity. This is great. And we'll always open my schedule for a conversation with you.
How can everybody get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think the best way is email is the easiest. aclifford@sandiego.org. Or if you're interested in wine, it's joe@jetsetterwine.com.
Awesome. Dude, you're an amazing example of the events industry and the community I love so much. Can't wait to talk again soon.
Yeah,
Take care.
appreciate it. Likewise. Thanks, Dan.
Well, there we go. Another amazing example of the universe working in its magnificent way today. Appreciate you showing up and look forward to seeing you again at Leadership and Enlightenment.